Jane Goodall.
One of the true female pioneers in this field. Her approach to wildlife was so gentle and humble and really involved a lot of listening, a lot of observation, a lot of patience.
She was one of the first people in her field to actually develop that connection with the chimps.
She walks the walk. She supports those causes, gives awards to them. They give funding to their organizations. So it's the whole package. Animals are like people. She gave them names. She studied their personalities. She felt like they had emotions. She observed them having emotions just like we do. She really just earned their trust. I mean, she respected them, so they ended up respecting her. She could have given up, and she didn't. She persisted. She was also passionate about what she was doing. This wasn't like a job for her, quote unquote. This was her passion. And I think when they say when you do what you love, you're never working a day.
Hello everyone! I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. In The Nomadic Soul, each chapter opens with case studies of 6 well-known figures from modern history who, I believe, lived with fully expressed nomadic souls. They were people of substance and character, with a strong sense of morals and ethics. They were driven by a strong mission to help the world through their contributions. So, for the next 6 episodes, I'll speak to experts and biographers of these individuals. Together, we'll distill the wisdom and lessons from their unique life stories and inspire you to reach your full potential. I hope you'll embark on this journey with me because you just might discover valuable insights to take your life to the next level. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoyed this episode. No one is an island. Even though we need to occasionally step away to engage in our solo pursuits, we still need a place that we can come home to. Having roots makes us feel like we are part of a community and are not alone on our quest. That's why connecting with others is a fundamental need we must fulfill to thrive. One person who exemplifies the importance of community and being connected to the world around us is ethologist and conservationist Dr. Jane Goodall. From her decades of learning and observing chimpanzees in their natural habitat, to her more recent years spent educating and building awareness about conservation and solidarity, she's been guided by a deep spiritual and moral conviction to reveal the common thread that connects us all. Jane reminds us that we are connected and we are all vital parts of a beautiful whole. When our head and heart work in harmony, we can deeply understand all living creatures, including our fellow humans. To discuss Jane Goodall's long and illustrious career and her message of love and hope, I invited Susan B. Katz. Susan is a best-selling Spanish bilingual author and illustrator. She has over a dozen published titles and won several awards, including the 2020 International Book Award for Best Mind, Body, Spirit Children's Book, and the Moonbeam Gold Award for the Best Picture Book in celebration of My Mama Earth. Hello, Susan. How are you doing today?
How are you?
I am doing great. I'm so happy to have you on the show, and I'm so glad that we were able to connect today. I came across your work after looking for books on Jane Goodall, and your book was one of the first ones that showed up in the search results. And I have to say that it's apparent that you really love what you do, which is writing these beautiful books for children. But I am curious, Susan, what inspired you to write a book about Jane Goodall specifically? Because really, you could have written about anybody. There are so many inspiring figures from history. So why her?
Well, thank you for having me and for asking such a great question. So, I actually studied environmental science and environmental education at the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and the Environment. And so, she was already one of my mentors in college. I went and worked in a Costa Rican rainforest and for my junior year abroad. And she was one of the role models for me as a woman scientist who went into the field and actually, as you know, lived with the chimps and studied them. So she blazed a path that I went on in terms of working in the rainforest and trying to, which we did, conserve it as a national park. It took 10 years. So I was there 1 year and then people came after me. And 10 years later, it became a national park to protect it. So she was somebody that was exalted to me as one of the women in the sciences that was really a pioneer, you know. And so since then, since researching her book and writing her book, and we had this pandemic, this got me back into what I was really doing a lot of in Costa Rica, which was wildlife photography. So she had what became her husband, come and photograph and take video of what she did. But I've since started doing a lot of wildlife photography. And I also I'm fortunate to live in an area where there are tons of animals. I sort of joke that I'm like Snow White where I live because, well, just in the sense of like there's deer, wild turkeys, big hare, big rabbits, and all coyotes, all kinds of animals that come here. And I feel a strong connection to them like she did.
Wow, that's interesting. I had no idea that you were an environmental scientist and a wildlife photographer. Is that something that you're still doing right now?
I am. So I to put my photography on SmugMug and sell it, but I'm also working on with one of my publishers getting books published with my photos for kids because there's a real need for STEM books for all children, but again, particularly to inspire young girls to go into the sciences. And so the hope and what I'm working on is taking some of my photos, and I can show you some later, but taking some of my photos and using them for children's books to educate kids about, wildlife and what they can do in their communities. Here, I'll change to one of them so you can see that. So that's this is one of my photos.
Wow, it's beautiful.
So I do a lot of travel and I do a lot of travel and wildlife photography. And really, it was like a silver lining of the pandemic because I got back into it because there wasn't a lot to do. You could go and hike and take pictures. And so that's how I get back. But she really is one of the true female pioneers in this field.
So Jane Goodall obviously inspired you on a professional level. But what about her personal life? Like in terms of how she approached relationships towards other creatures and the world around us. What did you learn about that? What did you extract from her story in terms of building that kind of bond with other creatures in the environment?
So I think it's twofold. On the one hand, there's a saying, well-behaved women rarely make history. So on the one hand, she was very bold in terms of in the scientific community, people questioned her because she didn't have it in the beginning. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have a doctorate. She didn't have a master's in it. And a lot of people questioned, who's this young woman, off studying this and putting out her scientific findings, even though she was doing it via Leaky. So on the one hand, she was super bold and super bucking conventions and thinking and living out of the box. And on the other hand, her approach to wildlife and the people in the local community was so gentle and humble and really involved a lot of, how shall I say, a lot of listening, a lot of observation, a lot of patience. She took, it was, I think, I want to say 6 months in the beginning where she just took notes and observed and sat and watched them and waited until she had this like turning point, a monumentous turning point, which I'll talk about, that connected her and gained the trust of, of the chimps. And, she was doing that for months leading up to that. And she could have given up and she didn't. She persisted. She was also passionate about what she was doing. So this wasn't like a job for her, quote unquote. This was her passion. And I think when they say, when you do what you love, you're never working a day. And so, one of those moments was when she put something in her hand. I think it was some berries, I believe. And one of the chimps reached and then held her hand, like went to take that and held her hand. And she said that made everything worth it. All the time she'd been waiting, all the, days where nothing really transpired, that interaction made it worth it for her.
Yeah, and I guess her rebelliousness paid off because she was one of the first people in her field to actually develop that connection with the chimps. I know that she was at the Gombe Reserve, as you said, for a few months. And initially they would run away from her and they didn't want anything to do with her. But after some time, like she was trying to interact with them and slowly build their trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's remarkable that she was able to do that and really build a rapport with these creatures. Do you have any insight into how she did that over time?
Yeah. She felt like animals are like people. She gave them names. She studied their personalities. She, she felt like they had emotions. She observed them having emotions just like we do. Grief, jealousy, anger. So she gave each one of them names, even though the scientists, when she eventually did go get her doctorate in England, were like, no, you have to number animals. You don't give them names. And she had learned at a young age from her own dog, Rusty, that of course you give, that's how we connect people, animals. And I mean, I don't know that the chimps would have understood her calling them names, but she had personalities assigned to and names assigned to these chimpanzees. She learned their individual calls. She learned their hierarchy and, who was kind of on top at which point. There's a very clear hierarchy. And she really just earned their trust. I mean, she respected them. And so they ended up respecting her. I think they knew she wasn't, after time, and I see this, it's not the same, but I see it with the deer where I am now, because I feed them apples and they know I'm not going to hurt them. They're not running away anymore. They know I live here. And, so I think it took some time, but again, that listening, that observation, the patience, she spent days just sitting there, crouched down, taking notes and just observing. And I think once they saw that she wasn't going to harm them, because there were a lot of poachers in the vicinity. And so they probably had a healthy amount of fear. But once they saw she was not one of those, then I think she gained their trust.
Yeah, and I think this says a lot about the value of patience and observation with anybody, even like our fellow human beings. If we just take the time to get to know somebody and to really listen to them at a deep level, we can learn how to communicate with them and understand their ways.
Exactly. And she did the same with, local people in the community, because and in her work since then in Roots and Shoots, she is really about what is the issue in your local community. She listens to people and she finds collaboratively solutions for what's going on. So she doesn't impose her own views on people. She really listens to what are the needs of the community. Why were people poaching? What was the, impetus or what was behind that, so that she could get to the root of the problem and solve it, right? And you cannot do that without listening to people. it's key. You have to know. And again, she has this one quote that when you live in the forest, it's easy to see that everything's connected. So she really, saw and believed in the interconnectedness of humans and animals. And we're all in a symbiosis. So we depend on all the animals and trees and the ecosystem and everything, all of the creatures, insects, we're all interconnected. And I think when you, having worked in the rainforest myself, when you see that firsthand, there's no question to you in your mind that everything is interconnected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that requires a certain amount of openness and a global worldview. For someone as young as Jane at that time to go to Africa, which was so far away from home, and subject herself to this foreign environment, probably the only Caucasian woman in that area at that time. I mean, I'm assuming that would have been the case. Totally outside her comfort zone. And then in the presence of these creatures, the chimps, who could pose a potential threat to her. So I'm wondering what was going on in her head when she was doing all this.
Yeah, she always loved animals. She always knew she wanted to study animals. And in this sort of freak, like coincidence, she happened to show up when Leakey needed an assistant. And then he said, "Do you want to go study apes?" It was very like fortuitous, but it wasn't without its trials and tribulations. Her mother went with her originally because she was, so young, and her mom didn't want her to be on her own. And then both of them got malaria. And so her mom had to go back. So she really had a, fortitude and resilience that is so remarkable. And I think, she really wanted to help the planet, and she still does. She's, much older now, but she's still very active in helping the planet. And I think she thought, that saying that one person can really, something like, if you ever doubted that one person could make a difference, this is all that's ever made a difference, is one person, one small group of people really tipping the scales. So I think she had the desire and the willingness to, in the beginning, I think we're going to talk a little bit about this more, but the chimps, when they didn't trust her in the beginning, there were things that went awry for sure. And she just trusted the process. And
like what? What happened?
So in the beginning, when they set up camp and they were going to give the chimps bananas and things like this, and they came down and just ransacked her camp. Just took pillows and all the bananas, but everything. And so
I'm just thinking of that scene in Tarzan where the gorillas went and made a mess of their camp. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
So similar
trash in the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she was inspired by Tarzan. Now that you mentioned Tarzan, she said she thought as a child she thought he married the wrong Jane. So she was, she was really, and then also she was very inspired by Dr. Dolittle. So she felt like she could talk to animals. But also, aside from the aggressive behavior of stealing, bananas. And so what they ended up doing was moving that, separate from where they lived, because they saw that was a problem. But so no food near where they lived for the chimps. But they also, the chimps had conflicts. And in this hierarchy, sometimes there was fighting. There were chimps hurting each other. And at one point they split into like two sort of gangs, the North and the South gang, as she labeled them. And there was all kinds of, like, they call it the 4-year war. There was like conflict going on between them. So she kept observing this behavior, but it did become somewhat dangerous to be near and, witnessing these conflicts. So yeah, there is a dark side to the chimps, but they're animals. So we have to know that.
Yeah.
And accept that, right?
Initially, she thought they were peaceful, gentle creatures, but that really was not the case. The more she observed them, the more she was able to notice a dark side to their nature, very much like human beings.
Yes.
What were there other things that she noted about things that they did that seemed a little bit, I guess, devious, probably?
I think, like I mentioned before, she really noticed, like, aggressivity when there was jealousy. So if, for a baby or for mating, things like that. And it's not unlike humans in that way. I mean, it's very similar to, what drives people to be violent. And so I think, her observations were essential in noting that they had that, but they also had this sweet side of, introducing her to their babies when they were born, bringing them to show the babies to her, and, things that were so gentle and so sweet. And I think that human nature has the potential of having both sides of that coin, right? And so do animals. They have impulses. So those were the main things, was this kind of the war, the split of the two groups fighting in that. And, there were chimps who killed each other. I mean, it was.
Yeah. Didn't they eat a particular kind of monkey? I think it was the Gombe monkey. They were eating them.
I think that is the case. And so she also learned a lot, I think, about, your sphere of influence and what you can control and what you can't control. She was an observer, and she couldn't really, change what was going on, but she observed. And so this isn't necessarily about the dark side, but one of the other things that was a huge milestone in her scientific research was seeing that before her work, people thought that humans were the only ones who used tools. And then she observed David Greybeard, one of her chimps that she named, taking a grass stem and sticking it into a termite mound to get the termites out. So that she wrote that research and telegraphed it back to Dr. Leakey, and then it made international news, and people just couldn't believe that an animal was using tools. So the intelligence of that, the foresight of doing that was huge for her to discover, and I think honestly gained a lot of respect for her in the field.
How did the chimps perceive her and other human beings? Did she get any intel on that?
Well, initially they were afraid because there'd been poachers, right? As I mentioned. And then I think, she showed them, oftentimes I think human beings have this attitude of getting rid of. I just heard that in the county where I live, someone told me that there's different kinds of owls, right? We know this. I know this. I take a lot of pictures of owls, but someone told me that they're going to. There's a proposition to start killing the barred owls because they're hurting the barn owls and the great horned owls. And so it's like we come into this thing and we think, well, we can control. I mean, this is nature. This is nature. So I think she showed a tremendous amount of respect for them. And she brought a lot of young scientists into her studies afterwards. And I think they learned to trust her. And then they learned to trust whoever she brought along over time, along with her. And so, I mean, I think it is really that same thing as a human approach. Like if you're kind and patient and connect with the person, she looked in their eyes. We're so close to them in terms of, evolution that I think she treated them like she would have treated a child or another person. I mean, I think she, connected with them on that level, and very few people probably ever do that. So I feel like she has a very special relationship with them that hasn't really been replicated by that many people.
Yeah, clearly. And it says so much about her empathy and her able to really tune into their world and their perspective on things. What were they able to find, Jane and her team, were they able to find any more links between the chimps or other animals and human beings?
I would say the main ones that she sort of put forth in her research were, chimps having emotions and expressing emotions just like humans do. Like she really documented the different emotions and what was the catalyst for each emotion. So, any aggressivity that was a result of jealousy or territorialness, right? Look at our war that's going on in the Middle East. This is a territory war, And so not our war, but the war that's going on in the Middle East. This is over territory. And
You're referring to the one with Palestine and Israel, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Hamas, yeah.
And these chimps fought over land, basically over territory when they were in the North-South group, not unlike us. I was in a lecture when I was at Michigan, and our professor said there are 3 reasons for war. And I don't know if you want to take a guess what those 3 reasons are.
Resources would be one. Ideology. And I don't know about the third. What's the third one?
It's interesting. So land, right? Okay. Which is what's going on right now. I guess you could argue that resources are a part of that, right? I'm sorry, I'm going to do just a moment of, I know what the third one is because it's such a surprise. Okay. I can't think of it right now, so I'm not, the punchline of my joke, but not a joke. But so let's just, for the sake of argument's sake, land, resources, and women. And so this in the history of wars, right? The chimps in the similar way would fight over mates, right? And would fight over land, food. So there's similar things. And at the same time, they had that incredible, caringness towards their infants. And she said, actually, now that I'm remembering, when she became a mother to her son, she learned a lot about motherhood and mothering from the chimps because it was simultaneous. She had her child while she was there. She gave birth, and then he grew up there. And so she said she felt like she learned a ton from watching the chimps mother, and she felt like they learned from her, looking at how she was mothering. So I think you may have seen recently, there was a video where a woman brought her baby close to a chimp in a zoo, and the chimp kind of came to the glass and kissed, like he was kissing the forehead of the baby.
Oh, and I haven't seen that, but I would like to.
Amazing. It's like, they care for their children just like their infants and their toddlers, just like we do. It's not that different, And there was actually another one that was a zoologist, and there was a chimp that was having difficulty breastfeeding. And she brought her infant, she was breastfeeding. She brought that child to the room that chimp was, and through a glass, showed how she was doing this. And the chimp learned from her how to do. So there's like these exchanges that you can have that are very almost human to human, even though it's chimp to human.
So on a deep primal level, we are the same.
Yeah. I mean, I think
the only difference between us and them is that we have the logical mind, I guess, our rational mind. That's what may prevent us from operating on that emotional level.
Yes. Okay. I remember now. It's land, religion, and women. So those are the 3. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you said that anyway, so that's great. Yeah.
So I think that piece of them really having emotions and exhibiting emotions just like we do is really key. And then of course the tools was like one of her main discoveries.
Hey everyone, are you enjoying Jane Goodall's story so far? Be sure to read the rest of her story in depth in my book, The Nomadic Soul, and be inspired by the life of the other 5 nomadic souls I've covered. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. I can't wait to take you on this profound journey. So all these experiences that she had with the chimps and other animals and her findings, it really galvanized her efforts and inspired her to spread her message about the planet and conservation. How has her message able to further education and build awareness? Because I know she has a foundation and a children's program. I think it's called Roots and Shoots, right? So how has that really been able to push the cause into the public discourse?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I want to back up just a little bit. And when I first started researching this biography, I was so fortunate that she was coming to San Francisco at that time to speak. And so I got to go hear her speak. And that really helped inform my research, because when you hear it from the actual person, there's no better source. And at that event, she had all of these award-winning youth who had come through the Roots and Shoots program all over the globe. They were being given their awards for their projects in so many different, conserving. It could have been, it wasn't just chimpanzees, obviously, could have been ocean life, or, anything that was needing to be protected all over the globe. They were giving awards to. It was roughly a couple dozen youth. So that came up. That is from Roots and Shoots, which was established in 1991. And it's a global youth leadership program. And it's in almost 100 countries. So it's really very widespread. And they basically, again, they ask youth to identify problems in their community with conservation and become those compassionate leaders who help change the planet. So it's really blazing a path for youth to do that. So in 1990, she helped get chimps on the endangered list. So that was a huge milestone as well, prior to opening Roots and Shoots. In 1994, she set up Takare in Tanzania. So it's something that's enabling and empowering the local people to conserve and protect the chimps. And I think that attitude of, it's not always going to be, an external person coming in and trying to help. We should empower and give agency to the people in local communities. And then she also, another thing that seems like something small, but she went vegan, and she adopted that plant-based lifestyle because of the negative impact of animal agriculture on the environment, on animal welfare, and on human health. So we don't think about it, but in this symbiosis in the ecosystem, when you have lots of cattle grazing, you're cutting down trees, which, depletes the oxygen and the habitats for wildlife, the fertilizer and, stuff from the animals is going into the waters, which is making the water polluted. So there's all this impact and ramifications of that. So she's been vegan for a number of years. So that's another way in which she influences people to try to go plant-based.
I'm curious to know, what was your experience like listening to her speak live?
It's like hearing a hero that you've had for, 30 years. And she's so eloquent and so funny. And she starts.
I love listening to her. I love listening.
Yeah. She starts every talk with mimicking one of the chimps' calls. So she's really good at that. And it's always very entertaining to see. I mean, I hadn't seen it before, but like to hear that and see that live, it was like, wow, it quiets the whole audience, because not many people can do the actual call of a chimpanzee, right? So it gets your attention right away. And I mean, I was just enthralled and enraptured. I was taking notes. I just for my own research recorded it on my voice memo so that I could listen back to what she said. And probably shouldn't do that, but I wasn't going to publicize it. It was just for my book. And I think also what I really came away with was that she didn't just do this one project in this one country with these one group of chimpanzees. She then turned that as a model for other youth around the world. And she really emphasizes how the youth is what keeps her hopeful, that she feels like, you look at Greta Thunberg or, any of the youth who have fought for anti-plastics or, all the environmental causes. It's a lot of times it is youth starting up these causes. And she was young when she started. So I think she knows that in order to keep that fire lit, we have to start with the young people. And so that really resonated with me, that, I was 20 when I worked in rainforest, and that we have to inspire. I have nieces and nephews, and I taught for 30 years. So really making sure that we make children aware of what's going on in the world is really not just a goal of hers, but she walks the walk. She supports those causes, gives awards to them. They give funding to their organizations. So it's the whole package.
And I love the fact that she doesn't make it overly political, because that is the road a lot of people take.
Yeah. It's like something, I don't know. I mean, I'll say this, but I feel like somehow, I'm not sure how, global warming has been attributed to liberals and, progressives. And it's
know. How does that happen?
To all of us, like how possible. So I think yeah, you're right. She keeps it neutral, and she also recognizes that there's a lot of political instability in some of the places that people are. So being neutral is key to being able to be the person who comes in and helps two sides. So when I was working in the rainforest, I actually worked for an organization called the GTZ, and it's not to glorify the German government, but it's a German organization that comes in and kind of brings two sides together. So I was working between the two organizations that are MAG and MIDINEM. MIDINEM is the Ministry of Resources, Energy, and Mines, and MAG is the Ministry of Agriculture and Cattlery. So you can imagine that these two had opposing goals, and yet we did agroforestry projects so that we could grow trees where animals were also being still raised. There were all kinds of projects that brought these two interests together, and I think that's the idea, kind of what Jane does, is try to get groups in the local community empowered, but to see that they have more in common than they do differences.
Just imagine how much more peace there would be if we took the same attitude everywhere in the world. Like if we just put aside our differences and focus on our commonalities and the fact that we are all citizens of planet Earth. I mean, that would change the whole paradigm.
I agree. And I think she does that beautifully, because she kind of sounds the alarm, but in a way that's like, look, we need this planet. Like we all need this planet. It doesn't matter your race, your religion, your political persuasion. Everybody needs to have these resources in our planet. And so I think that's one of her pillars, is really, it's a human thing that we need. And the animals, like we can't survive. So she does sound the alarm quite a bit, but in a very unifying way, I find.
And did that influence you and your own identity?
I think as an educator, it definitely did, because I really brought, and as a writer, a lot of my books are, someone could see something as political. I've gotten, comments on different books that I've written that find it political, but I think when we're talking about women's rights, for example, that runs the gamut also. I have friends who are every religion, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, Buddhist, and we're all impacted by things that are going on with women's rights. So I think, environmentalism wise, I feel like I did bring that to the classroom quite a bit, that children needed to see the world as, not divided, but as something that we have in common, the resources in the world and the animals and things like that.
Oh, goodness. We need educators like you out there. We really do. Because, I feel like we're getting increasingly more divided.
Yeah. And I think now, because I'm not in the classroom anymore, I'm writing full time. I think now what I do is bring that message to children through my books. And maybe perhaps I have a wider audience that way than in the classroom. It's possible.
Yeah, you have a bigger reach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, other biographies like Gandhi, I wrote Gandhi's biography, I wrote Fred Rogers' biography, and, Albert Einstein. And I think showing that people, obviously, Fred Rogers had to, be kind, be kind, be kind. Like that was his mantra, right? And then Albert Einstein, little known fact, when there was an African-American jazz musician who came to perform, but it was at a time where Black people weren't allowed to stay at hotels. And even though she was performing for people, she wasn't allowed to stay at the hotel there. He opened his home to her. And he said,
wow. I never heard this story before.
Yeah. And I believe he was Jewish, so he understood discrimination and anti-Semitism. So he empathized with that. And I think, again, that empathy of being able to see life from someone else's perspective and extend yourself in compassion and in loving kindness to that person it's a game changer. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And other women that a lot of the biographies have done a bit about women, so go figure. But Marie Curie was another scientist who was given very little credit for the work she was doing. I won't go into too much, but she wasn't named for the Nobel Prize when she was one of the prime scientists on it. And so one of the men said, no, I'm not taking this Nobel Prize unless Her name is also on it. So people have to be upstanders for each other. And I think that's a lesson that we get from Jane and from many other female and male heroes is, how can we be upstanders for each other?
Yeah, I love that. And most of us are not able to devote our life to connecting with and protecting animals in the environment, as Jane has. So, what do you recommend that people can do to connect with the natural world and somehow try to contribute to the world around them?
Yeah, there's a ton that we can do just on the local level. I personally get out into nature every day. I mean, I've been on deadline the last few weeks, so it's been hard. But I try, like, I go down and, take pictures of the whales and share those. I think getting into nature is the number one thing, making sure you're out, experiencing nature, connecting with nature. But also on the local level, like what are some issues? Is there pollution in a river nearby? My mentor at Michigan was Bill Stapp, and he was the first director of the United Nations Environmental Education Program. And he worked on a program that connected, it was called GREEN, Global Rivers Environmental Education Network. And wherever there was a watershed that was shared, so let's say between Texas and Mexico, right? He would put in place, and this was before the internet, there was intranet, right? He would put in place a way for kids to take tests of the water quality, and communicate with each other about the water quality at different points along the river. And I think he did that also in the Middle East. So he took an environmental problem and had local communities working together, the children in local communities, the students, working together to solve that problem because we share that resource. So it doesn't matter that there's this border in, with Palestine and Israel or with Texas and Mexico, the US and Mexico. We share a resource. We share the air. We saw this with the fires in Canada and the smoke coming down. We share all these resources, and there's no way to avoid that. So number one is get out in nature, be aware of what's going on in your local community, but even conservation, like recycling, reducing, reusing. I mean, that sounds like, simple things, but it really makes a difference if one person and one family does that. There are, local animal shelters. There are local conservation groups. I know in the Bay Area, there's a wildlife conservation group. There's a mammal rehabilitation. They always take volunteers, so kids and adults can volunteer, places like that. And I think there's a lot at stake right now in the US in our election with some environmental laws that could be rolled back. And so being, political and getting out there and working towards, solutions that are going to not hurt our planet, I think is really important as well.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with all that. But I think we all have to be motivated to do something. Like we need to get off our phones, get off social media, get off our butts, basically, and actually get out there and be outside. And I think once you do that, you'd find ways to contribute if you're creative, if you can tap into your connections and find out what really needs to be done to improve your community.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think people say like nature is my church or whatever, right? Or my temple. And I kind of think that's the case for me. Thank you so much. Great questions.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. This has been such a wonderful and insightful discussion. I really appreciate you sharing such great stories about Jane and her philosophy, and your love for the planet. Really, I mean, I'm truly surprised because I feel like I didn't know so much about you, and I really appreciate you sharing that side of you during our conversation today.
Oh, thank you so much. I am honored.
And I just want to let our listeners know if you're interested in purchasing a copy of Susan's book on Jane Goodall or learning more about her other fabulous books that we talked about today, please visit susankatzbooks.com. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, be sure to grab your copy of The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world at thenomadicsoulbook.com. Join me for the next episode in this special series where we'll excavate the wisdom from the story of another luminary to guide us on ways to get unstuck and move forward while discovering new vistas within ourselves.